Welcome to the Patriotic Pulpit. I am Bill Lockwood. Today we're looking at foreign aid. And specifically, we're applauding the work that Elon Musk has done. What a great patriot, working for nothing for the American government, pointing out, highlighting the graft and corruption that has gone on in different government agencies. And specifically, I want us to think about the agency, the USAID. In podcasts past, I've talked about some of the absolute ridiculous expenditures that American taxpayers have actually funded through USAID. Later on, we're going to look at how USAID got started and what really is the philosophy behind USAID. What is the philosophy behind it? And does it meet the constitutional test? Absolutely, of course, we will see that it does not. But be that as it may, Elon Musk has done a great job regarding pointing out the graft and corruption in so many different areas of not only U.S. aid, but also different areas of the federal government. So let's talk about USAID. And here's an article that has come out in the Epoch Times when the last issue, this is the middle of April. This is April. I think the issue is the first week actually of April. So this is April 2 through 8. And the article on the front page is highlighted, Africa is at a crossroads after USAID cut, so analysts say. So from Johannesburg, South Africa, the African countries reacted with shock as the U.S. government recently cut $13 billion in financial assistance. But analysts said the move could spur those countries toward better governance. And even critics said it shines a spotlight on the most corrupt nations on the planet. More on that in just a moment. In fiscal year 2024, the U.S. government gave almost $13 billion in taxpayer funds to aid countries in Africa, which is rated the world's most corrupt region by a watchdog organization called Transparency International. So we'll talk about Transparency International as we proceed along the way. So note that most countries in South Africa are the most corrupt in the world, and yet we continue to give through the agency USAID, in 2024, $13 billion in U.S. taxpayer funds. And this should mean something because this is tax season. April 15th, just around the corner. And Americans are going to be hurting because of the IRS. And this is just one small sliver of the misappropriated funds through U.S. aid that goes on. But the article in the Epoch Times regarding South African countries tells us this. Most of the money was administered by U.S. Agency for International Development, that is, USAID, which has since had most of its programs paused, thankfully, and been folded into the State Department. Now, I'm going to say this. Not only does the program need to pause and all the monies need to stop flowing, but we need to shut it down. There is absolutely no constitutional authority for us to send $1 of foreign aid to another nation from taxpayers in the United States. I'd like for someone to tell me what constitutional plank authorizes the federal government to take any money out of my pocket and send it overseas. It is unconstitutional to begin with. How did we get there? That's the latter portion of this particular podcast. The money was largely directed to programs to feed people in famine-affected areas and to treat and prevent infectious diseases such as HIV, malaria, and tuberculosis. So the organization that is screaming the loudest about us pausing the funds, putting the pause button on the foreign aid, is the United Nations. The United Nations, the UN, suggested that millions of lives are at stake because of the withdrawal of U.S. aid. It says nearly 16 million Ethiopians relied on grain donated by the United States in 2024, as the East African country was hammered by drought and civil war. In South Africa, money from USAID was paying the salaries of staff from hundreds of nonprofits that were working on the largest antiretroviral rollout program in the world, giving medicine to almost 6 million people infected with HIV. Consequently, not only the United Nations, but other organizations and the internationalists, that is, those in our country who are internationally minded and therefore not interested in America First agenda, not interested in the Constitution, they are screaming bloody murder because Trump's administration has put a pause on the money going through USAID, as well as many other agencies, to foreign nations. Now, there is, on this African story, there's another side to the issue, another side to the story. We'll notice it now. On the other hand, according to Nigerian economist Ngak Gandhi, I suppose is how you say his name, Gondyi, he said, it is time for Africa to get its own house in order. Isn't that the truth? The more money that you give to segments of society, whether it be a South African nation, whether it be a nation on the continent of Africa, the continent of Asia, or whether it be a segment of society in the United States, the more money that is given, the less inclined they are to put their own financial house in order. And that is simply human nature. And the more that parents continue to support their children at home, even when they're in their 20s and 30s, and should be out supporting their parents, no, instead, if the children are living continually at home in their 20s and 30s, they are not incentivized to put their own house in order. They're not going to put their own house in order because they're on the take. And that's exactly what's going on in South Africa. Transparency International's annual Corruption Perceptions Index, this is from Transparency International, analyzes graft in 180 countries. According to the 2024 index, almost half of the 40 most corrupt countries are in sub-Saharan Africa, the poorest region in the world. That is, one half of those countries that are the poorest and the most corrupt, that is, the governments are corrupt, are in the sub-Saharan African continent. Now, that's what's going on in South Africa. That's why they're not going to put their house in order, because they have corrupt governments. Think about, for example, the money that we have given over to the foreign nations in North Africa. Several years ago, we have been giving so many millions of dollars to North African nations. And what do we find out? When we went over there and we had wars involved, we found some of those kings living like as rich as Croesus, and they had gold telephones, they had gold toilets. The money that we had given through USAID, our aid given through USAID, was grafted by the governments of those countries, and the people were still living in poverty. And that's exactly what's going on in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa. So this article continues this way. This is from Transparency International. Corruption is systemic across all levels of government, pervades nearly every economic sector. Perpetrators enjoy widespread impunity. As such, it takes a heavy toll on the populace by diverting wealth from the country's extensive oil reserves into private pockets instead of public service provision or gross fixed capital formation. Last year, that is 2024, the United States gave $1.2 billion in assistance to Somalia, ranked by Transparency International as the world's second most corrupt country. Corruption is both one of the leading causes and consequences of endemic political instability in Somalia, Transparency International wrote. And there's much more on this in this particular article. I encourage you to look at the Epoch Times. Now, what's the point of all of this? The point of all of this is very simple. And that is, number one, foreign aid is unconstitutional. But the point of the article is We send money over to these foreign nations, and those governments are the controllers of the money. They're corrupt, and they soak up the money, and the people that are there, the poverty-stricken people in the countries, they don't receive any of it. So it doesn't matter what the United Nations may cry and scream about. The people are not getting it anyway. So let's just talk for a few moments about foreign aid itself as a principle, as a policy. Foreign aid is actually international socialism. It is absolutely unconstitutional. And I challenge any congressman, any senator, any policymaker to tell us in the Constitution one plank that authorizes the taking of my tax money, I'm coming up to April 15th, pretty quickly here, and sending it overseas. Now, someone may say, well, don't you care about the people that are poor over there? I care about poor people everywhere, but I can't support every poor person. Here's the deal. Giving money, which is charity, is a private matter or a church matter. If people are so interested in the poor that are in Africa or in Mexico or in Asian countries, let them go there. Let them give their money voluntarily. Give that money to those people. But as it is, the government soaks up 50% almost of all of the monies that I make to send it to other countries or send it to peoples, which I want to give money elsewhere, but they've really cut out my selective process because they've stolen the money and given it overseas. Foreign aid is international socialism. It is an international leveling by the strong arm of government. Hard-earned money taken from U.S. taxpayers, redistributed abroad according to the whims of globalist micromanagers. This is international socialism. It is viewed by the most doctrinaire supporters not just as a remedy for the suffering of the world's poor, but they absolutely have stated and continue to state that it is a just imposition on the greedy, unfairly affluent West. For example, Democrats such as Obama, when he came into office years ago, said he would double foreign aid to improve America's image abroad. President Bush, see, Republicans are guilty too, doubled development, he called it developmental assistance overseas. But all of this has had an opposite effect because that's what socialism does. It has an opposite effect from what is claimed. They're not punishing the rich in America. It's a burden on the middle class, number one. Because the wealthy people, they tuck their money into tax-free organizations. The George Soroses of the world are not paying the taxes that we're paying. Number two, almost always the aid, as we've seen from this article, goes to the socialist countries' governments, not the people. The dictators build monuments to their own vanity. And so when Muammar Gaddafi's palace was raided by our own soldiers, they discovered what? They discovered gold-plated walls. And that was from U.S. taxpayer money. So think about the roots of foreign aid. Foreign aid has become our foreign policy, and Donald Trump is upsetting the apple cart on this one, and thankfully he's doing so. The Congressional Research Service report for Congress of 2004, April of that year, said that foreign aid is an essential instrument in foreign policy. How do you like that? Foreign aid is an essential instrument in foreign policy, even though there is not one scintilla of constitutional evidence, proof, or authority to send $1 of my money overseas. The U.S. government document also stated the keystone to the United States foreign policy is foreign aid. And just to show, this is in 2004 now, just to show how they were doing it, of the 192 countries overseas, the United States, in one form or another, was giving money, get this, to 174 countries. Tax dollars, 174 countries out of the 192 possible countries overseas. We aided repressive regimes in Africa, the Mideast. The economy was roaring over there in China, but we were at 9% a year, but we were continuing to give them foreign aid. Adversaries like Kim Jong II in North Korea. So a couple of years ago, during the coronavirus pandemic, when all nations were flat, China was growing at 2.3%. Why is that? Because we kept giving our money overseas while we were shutting down businesses here. Absolutely, the board has been tilted in favor of China by our own government officials for way too long. And thankfully, Donald Trump is trying to set the record straight. So, where did the United States foreign aid, where did all of that begin? Where are the roots of it? Well, it all began back in the internationalists in the Woodrow Wilson and particularly the Franklin Roosevelt administration. FDR, you see, was an internationalist. The real divide in America right now is between the internationalists and those who are nationalists. The internationalists want to make nationalism a bad word by conjuring up symbols of Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler was a national socialist, so he's not a nationalist in the sense we're using it because he was a socialist. That's what Adolf Hitler was. Nazism was socialism. But what we're looking at in internationalism is international socialism. So the philosophy of internationalism, international socialism, lines up more directly with Adolf Hitler than people like Donald Trump. The Exchange Stabilization Fund, created in the period of FDR, was used, one of the first organizations used to supposedly stabilize foreign currency. FDR wanted to stabilize the currency. So he confiscated private property in the United States, and he used international currency manipulation as a cover. So the first loan that was given was in January 1936 through the ESF to Mexico. It was an exchange between treasuries. The ESF quietly enlarged the issue of bailouts, continuing on. So through the years, we continued through the ESF to give money overseas to supposedly stabilize their currency. That's the ESF. Researcher Anna Schwartz tells us Congress ceded to the executive branch the power to extend foreign aid without prior congressional approval. There was no prior congressional approval, but nevertheless, Congress ceded to the executive branch to continue to give foreign aid through the ESF. So in 1995, I believe as Bill Clinton was the president, Mexico received another huge bailout through Clinton, billion with a B, dollars to the ESF funds. That was Bill Clinton. Why? Bill Clinton is an internationalist, just as FDR was, just as George Bush was. Now let's go to 1946, moving along the timeline. The International Monetary Fund. It was founded as a part of the Bretton Woods Act. John Maynard Keynes, Harry Dexter White, who was a Soviet spy in the FDR administration. So the IMF began small because that's the plan. They always begin small and then they're able to grow on it later. But I want you to hear Harry Dexter White's explanation as to the purpose of the IMF. The reason we want to give money to the international bank that they can borrow from poor countries and the U.S. taxpayer is put on the hook when they default on the loan. Here's Harry Dexter White. The purpose was to pierce at the weakest points extreme nationalism. Now, was he afraid that there was a Hitler arising in America? No. What he was afraid of is that people would draw back away from international socialism. And so he said, we want to pierce the weakest points of nationalism. Further, he said, a breach must be made and widened in the outmoded and disastrous economic policy of each country for itself, and the devil take the weakest, end of quote. So the IMF was used as an international leveler, siphon money off of unjustly wealthy Western nations, aka America, and send it overseas. And so the IMF became the chief supplier of money overseas. The United States at one time was stockpiling gold. Now the IMF is stockpiling gold. Then we have, that was not enough, the internationalists that has been controlling our government for so many years created the World Bank. The World Bank specializes in loans below market rates to foreign countries. And who picks up the tab when they don't pay? Once again, the U.S. taxpayer. As a matter of fact, the United States capital stock in the World Bank was $569 million as of June 2000. I'm sure it's much more than that today. More than 1/4 of it, of its $2.3 billion. So $569 million capital stock supplied by you, the American taxpayer, so that foreign countries may take advantage of you paying the IRS. But all of that was not enough. They didn't want to simply launder money through these international banks. Oh no. JFK himself pushed through USAID. It was a congressional act, but JFK, we were not getting money fast enough to the foreign nations. We were not practicing international socialism fast enough. So he says, we're going to create the USAID. And here's JFK's statement. Quote, there is no escaping our obligations, our economic obligations. For widespread poverty and chaos lead to a collapse of existing political structures, inviting advance of totalitarianism, end of quote. All right, what's the problem? The problem is overseas, they're poverty-stricken. That's going to bring on socialism, so it's our job to give them money to stop it. Now that is simply the cover. But what has happened is, exactly as we began the program, Elon Musk has uncovered that has become a giant slush fund for the Democratic Party. This is what happens when we decide we don't want the Constitution anymore at all. We're not going to follow the Constitution. We're going to simply give money away, and we're going to do it through these banks, international banks, and through the slush fund, the USAID. I can't wait for Elon Musk to get hold of. And by the way, has the Federal Reserve ever been audited, and has it ever been shown to the American people? No. I wish Elon Musk can do that. How about the World Bank? How about the International Monetary Fund? How about the Exchange and Stabilization Fund, ESF? Can we have an audit and have discuss on what's going on there? All of this is exactly why America now has such high prices and so many people itself that we cannot even take care of. What's happened? What's happened is international socialism, aid and comfort to foreign nations. And all of it, of course, completely, absolutely out of bounds, constitutionally speaking. I think it was Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky who said, shut down USAID, USAID. I don't want to simply trim it back. I don't want to simply cut down some of its more gross expenditures. I want it shut down. Donald Trump is on the right track, but whether we'll be able to do it or not, that's another story.